Welcome to the OG LiveWire, the GOAT District's waiver wire show. I'm excited to be here. We got an important week 3, and we're going to try to help you win your week.
GOAT District, you know the Pope listens. Dynasty, our religion, for the blokes missing. On all of these trades, on all of these plays, on all of these grades. By the end of the day, y'all getting played. So, what you gonna do next? Try to fill up that flex? Send the homie a text? That trash offer's the best? You try to make it complex, then they text you back. Now all of a sudden they don't make any sense. Broaden your horizons, boy. Dynasty's not for the Simons, boy. These trades not for consignment, boy. Respect your opponent, y'all some piranhas, boy. This my advice, from me to you. Open up your cute little podcast queue. Search up GOAT District, my dude. Pop it in your ear, man, y'all know what to do. It's the... And I always be trading. And I always be trading. And I always be trading. Y'all try to betray them, but first you gotta bait them. Fish.
So welcome back, everyone. We're here. This is our second time doing this. I hope you enjoyed last night's Monday Night Football doubleheader. It was incredible to have both of those games back-to-back in a reasonable time starting, especially for those of us on the East Coast, was very cool to see. In terms of the GOAT District teams, just a quick roundup. Our NFFC super team that Dan Williamson, Andrew Schellenberg, and I share is rolling. We're looking very good. We're in the top 2 in that league. And we've had Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson both emerge this week, which was very nice. Dan sends a text message to Andrew and I today that we're going to have some difficult lineup decisions. You like having difficult lineup decisions in a good way. So that team's looking very good. And in terms of our FFPC varsity team that we share, that team had a very nice scoring week. We dropped from 1 to 2 behind Chad Schroeder. He's has a very nice team, and he put up a huge number this week to jump above us. But that team's looking good as well. So it's really nice to get off to a good start, a nice quick start in these leagues. That team has Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill, which was really, really fun to do at the same time, and it's working out quite well. We also have our FFPC main event team that JD, Andrew, and Dan and myself share, the GOAT District team, and that team dropped to 0-2, but we have a lot of firepower. I think we can turn that thing around. We've been a little bit unfortunate both weeks, very, very close losses, and the team's just not falling apart. It's just it needs to do a little bit better. So it's nice to get off those quick starts. Shout out to Noah Riddell. I had a massive lead over Noah last night in our Hardway Football Guys League that we have a B-Bag Batoba in. Dan's in that league. Austin Martin's in that league. Dwayne McFarland's in that league. Darren Armani Fantasy Mojo's in that league. It's just a loaded league. I had a huge lead, and Noah was able to come back behind Stephon Diggs, who looks like just a league winner right now. So that was a tough one, but shout out to Noah. You deserve that one. That was a big time performance. And then in terms of dynasties, it's kind of all over the place. We've had a weird start to the season in terms of running back scoring versus wide receiver scoring. It seems like it's the year of the wide receiver. Thankfully, I went wide receiver heavy in multiple formats. However, some of these running back teams, I think we'll be able to turn it around a little bit. We've just got to keep grinding, and that's why we're here doing this waiver wire show. So it's a little bit of a weird week. I think last week we had a more impactful waiver wire. We had Curtis Samuel was a massive hit. He looks like he's a wide receiver 2 level player. We recommended you go out and get him. I mean, it was pretty obvious. You don't need me to tell you to go get Curtis Samuel after his week 1. But it was reassuring to see how he did in week 2. That Washington offense remained very pass-heavy. Now they have the Carson Wentz revenge game in week 3 against Philadelphia, a much tougher defensive opponent than Jacksonville or Detroit. But I think they're going to have to keep the pedal to the metal. The game's in Washington. And I think that you keep starting Samuel if you got him. I think he's an every week starter, to be honest. Let's take a look at the comments. Shout out to JD. Appreciate that, my man. We have a big show tonight. This is our first high stakes roundtable of the entire season. We have 2 guests tonight. If you play NFFC or if you play high stakes in general, you know Michael Edelman and Matt Modica. They've each been on the GOAT District before separately. We have them both on tonight. We're going to answer a couple of kind of moving forward type questions. We're going to re-rank the top 5 of each position. It's going to be a very helpful show for you, whether you play high stakes or not. Those guys are 2 of the biggest winners around. I'd say Michael Edelman is, as good a drafter as you're going to find. Matt Modica is extremely successful in both baseball and football fantasy. He's just an extremely sharp guy. Always enjoy his opinions. So just getting back to last week, Jeff Wilson looked good. Tyrion Davis-Price saw a big amount of carries. Jordan Mason, people bet on a little bit to be the potentially number 2 back there, but it was Tyrion Davis-Price who saw, pretty much all the work besides, Wilson. Tyrion Davis-Price goes down with an injury. It looks like he's going to miss maybe 6 weeks of the year now. Now you've got a decision to make. If you're looking to add a 49ers running back, you can go with Jordan Mason, who's going to be available still in a lot of leagues. I know he's available in some of mine. A lot of the 20-man high-stakes leagues, FFWC, FFPC, NFFC, he's been picked up, but I would just check your league because he's going to have an opportunity. And then Marlon Mack, the veteran, is just sitting there on the practice squad. He hasn't been there long, but if they're worried about Jordan Mason, you could see potentially Marlon Mack. It's interesting. It's an interesting situation in San Francisco now. You've got Jimmy Garoppolo coming back as quarterback. They'll be a little bit more pass heavy, but I think that you'll still see the running game being featured in a Kyle Shanahan offense. So basically getting to this week's additions, we'll start at the quarterback spot and we'll stick with Garoppolo. Trey Lance suffered a devastating injury. He's done for the year. There could have been a replacement during the year regardless of the injury. Lance has not looked great. I'm interested to see how his future goes. I have had high expectations for him this year. I have a FFPC main event team with Andrew Schellenberg and the Guilds that we drafted together, and Lance was our starting QB. We have Trevor Lawrence in the backup spot, but it's going to be a difficult go. That team was kind of relying on Lance. I think we took him in the 8th round. But Garoppolo is interesting. He's finished as QB 18 last season, and in 2019 he finished as QB 14. He's somewhere in the middle of a high-end QB2 and a middle range QB2. I don't think he's a back-end QB2 just based on the weapons he has. Deebo Samuel should get more looks in the passing game. Brandon Ayuk is sort of unlocked. Ayuk could see great success. And then, of course, we have George Kittle potentially coming back whenever he's ready. So the weapons are there for Jimmy to finish again in his QB2 range. If you were in a desperation, I think you could add him. If you're in a super flex league, be happy if you have him and consider, being aggressive getting him this week. Just know your expectations. He offers little to no rushing upside. He would be a guy that I would consider, though, because we have Dak Prescott out, and now we have Trey Lance done for the season. Jared Goff enters our waiver wire show. It's kind of crazy. We keep talking about these quarterbacks that we never thought we'd talk about, but Goff had 4 passing touchdowns for the first time since 2018 this past week. Amon-Ra St. Brown looks like an absolute alpha wide receiver 1. He could be the league winner when we talk about guys that are most impactful based on their ADP in terms of win rates. Amon-Ra St. Brown has to be up there right now. You were getting him in the 4th, sometimes the 5th round, and he's producing like a top 6 wide receiver. The offense is really kind of based around him, and DeAndre Swift has been extremely efficient. Both of those guys are at the top 5 of their positions, and Goff is kind of steering the ship Detroit has scored 35 and 36 points to open up the year, and they've scored 29 or more points in 5 of their last 6 games dating back to last season. They have a massive game against Minnesota this week. Goff is, again, like Garoppolo in a sense that he's not going to offer you any rushing upside. He's a floor play. Understand what you're getting, but he's going to put up some nice stat lines based on the players around him. And I'm super interested to see how Jamison Williams fits in. When Jamison Williams comes back, that offense could just go absolutely nuclear. They have Josh Reynolds, they have DJ Shark, they have TJ Hawkinson, Jamal Williams is a fine player. So they have, pieces, but Jamison Williams is dynamic and electric. And when you put him out there with Amon-Ra St. Brown and DeAndre Swift with that offensive line, that could be a really fun offense down the stretch. And then the third quarterback is Marcus Mariota. We talked about him last week. Arthur Smith might be an idiot. I think I'm saying that because I have a lot of Kyle Pitts, but Arthur Smith had this huge reputation in Tennessee. He gets a head coaching job in Atlanta based on how he did with the Tennessee offense. I think a lot of that has to do with they ran the big dog, and Derrick Henry was, as efficient a runner as we've seen the last few years. And I think Smith kind of, rode his coattails to a head coaching job. Last week we saw Mariota he was okay. He had Drake London emerge, which was nice to see. They still didn't feature Kyle Pitts, and they didn't have Mariota have as many designed rushing attempts as you saw in week 1. Mariota rushed for 70 yards in week 1, and he was pretty much non-existent this week. He's an interesting play because I think he has a rushing floor. If he doesn't do it again this week, then week 1 might be the exception, but I think he'll bounce back rushing-wise. Again, we talked about how Ryan Tannehill had success in an Arthur Smith offense, and I think Mariota could be looked at like that. So Garoppolo, Goff, and Mariota, those are the QBs that I would recommend. There's some guys that might be available to you in your league that would be ahead of those guys, but we're strictly looking at players that are available in 25%, rostered in 25% or less Yahoo leagues, and all 3 of those guys fit the bill. Running back wise, James Conner looks like he avoided a major injury, but his status for this week is up in the air. So we're going to look at Darrell Williams and we're going to look at Eno Benjamin. Darrell Williams, week 1 was non-existent. He only played special teams, but this past week he saw a big uptick in usage. He rushed 8 times for 59 yards and he caught 2 passes. He also played on third downs when Eno did not, which was a little surprising to me. So Darrell Williams, I think is we need to kind of adjust what our expectations were. And even though for a few weeks it looked like Eno Benjamin was the backup, I think that it's pretty much a split. And Darrell Williams is going to see those goal line touches, the short down and distance roll. So if I had both available in my league and I could pick one, it's probably Darrell Williams. With how running back needy people are right now, I think you could see some big bids on Darrell, which I would not recommend. First off, I think it's Connor is going to be back. And second off, with a week to prepare for the Los Angeles Rams, I'm not sure that the usage will be what we saw this past weekend against Las Vegas. Eno Benjamin will be less expensive. He's caught 6 balls over the first 2 games of the season. He's also had 12 rushing attempts. He had 8 rushing attempts this past game. I wonder what the usage will be like, but if you tell me that I could get, let's say, Eno Benjamin for $5 or fab, 5% fab, or Darrell Williams for 15% fab, I'm going to take Eno Benjamin as the cheaper addition. James Conner has struggled with injuries over his career. I don't think this is the one that does it, but once you start missing time, this could be something we see Conner struggle with all year long. So I recommend putting bids in for both, but don't go overspending. If you can get Darrell Williams for cheap, that's great. But if not, I'm fine with you grabbing Eno. Again, we talked about the San Francisco options, Marlon Mack, Jordan Mason. Jordan Mason is the young undrafted free agent. He's definitely got more juice. Marlon Mack was cut this year from the Texans. It's kind of hopeful to even say Marlon Mack, but again, Jeff Wilson's played the most games he's ever played in a year in his career was 12. And he's not going to be a guy who can be a bell cow for the entire season. I think that there's going to be a time where you see another back mixed in. Again, I would lean towards Mason, but $1 bid on Marlon Mack just to see what happens. That might pay off. The back that I'm most intrigued with this week is Tyler Algier. Algier did not play week 1. It was Damien Williams. Damien Williams got sent to the IR, and Algier stepped into a pretty nice size role. He had 10 carries. He only ran for 30 yards is the downside, but he had 10 carries. He was not targeted in the passing game, but they also didn't target Cordarrell Patterson. Algier was an extremely efficient running back at BYU. He has played both sides of the ball. He's a very tough player. He caught over 40 passes at BYU, and I think he's got the capability of doing so. And I'm interested to see what his role becomes in week 2. We'll kind of give him a mulligan efficiency-wise. I don't think he's a terrible player. I don't think he played well, and he certainly wasn't efficient. But he's a guy that appeared on a lot of zero RB lists, late round RB lists. There's some very sharp players who were on Algier. We saw him have a 2-touchdown game in the preseason. So I think there's something there. I would consider adding Algier and see where it's going. Cordarrell Patterson's never had more than the 153 carries he had last year. Again, you can say he never really played running back extensively until last year, but he's never been able to handle more than 153 carries. He's 31 years old, and I don't know which way this team is going. I think at some point they might just hand it over to Algier, and he might end up getting let's call it a 15-touch-a-game guy with potential for more. So he's a guy I would prioritize. I don't think you need to go nuts in your fab bid, but Algier would be a guy I'd want to walk away with this week at the running back spot. Jerick McKinnon makes the list, especially for people who play in very deep formats. He caught a touchdown this past week. Isaiah Pacheco took a big step back in terms of usage. I've heard the narrative that it's because it was a very short week is why Sky Moore and Pacheco didn't play. I think that makes a lot of sense, but there's no way for us to kind of confirm that. McKinnon has an every week role in Kansas City. He's going to get targets in the passing game. Right now it's Travis Kelce, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and then a lot of split usage from the wide receivers. So McKinnon's a guy that should be rostered, especially in these deeper formats, these 20-man leagues. But I think a 15-man roster league, you might want to consider McKinnon as well. If Clyde Edwards-Helaire misses time, I would expect Pacheco or Ronald Jones, to see some work. But I think that McKinnon would also see an uptick in targets. He'd be sort of like a Nyheim Hines, but attached to a Patrick Mahomes, which would be kind of exciting. Again, he's a veteran. It's a little boring. No one's going to say, wow, you got Jerick McKinnon this week. But he's a guy that makes for nice depth. Now, the waiver wire edition of the week, if he's available in your league, and this is like make it rain time because this might be the best waiver wire edition of the entire season, is Garrett Wilson. I have a good amount of Garrett Wilson in Dynasty, like a humble brag here. I have 20% Garrett Wilson in FFPC Dynasty League, so I'm super stoked about this. I also have a lot of Elijah Moore. I don't think this Garrett Wilson ascension is going to bury Elijah Moore, but Moore certainly looks like the number 2 guy for the Jets, not only in Dynasty, but also in redraft. Wilson had a massive game. He had a pretty impressive week 1 based on what we expected for him and what the reports were out of camp. We never really bought into this in the GOAT district. Andrew Schellenberg, Dan Williamson, JD, and myself, we talked up Wilson all summer long, but we didn't expect this. He goes for 2 touchdowns. He had 14 targets, and he caught 102 yards. He had 102 yards receiving on 8 catches. This was a massive breakout game. And you can say that this is a one-off, but every single time we've seen a young wide receiver make this sort of debut, it's really difficult to put it away. Wilson looks like he could be an absolute superstar in this league. If he's available in your league, shout out to Andrew Schellenberg. Andrew Schellenberg says Throw a $995 bid. I remember when Justin Jefferson had his breakout 2 seasons ago in week 3 in the NFFC. I won him for like, I think it was like $675, so like somewhere between $660 and $700. I won him, and that team was just okay, but he absolutely smashed. Chase Claypool had the massive breakout. He also went for a similar number. Wilson's available in none of my FFPC leagues. Like he's not available in any of them. He's not available in any of my NFFC leagues or my FFWC leagues. So like, I don't know. Shout out to Scott Kobe in the chat, a very good FFPC player himself. Do you think Garrett Wilson is the same player when they go back to Wilson, or does he take a step back? I don't know. I think he's here to stay. Again, we have like questions on Zach Wilson, but I think it's difficult to put Garrett Wilson away. I think you can treat him as a low-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3 with upside, but we've already seen him have a 30-point game in only his second game of his career. This is a shout-out to John Daigle. I believe it was Daigle that said this stat. Garrett Wilson leads the NFL in end zone targets right now. I mean, he's doing it. They're already featuring him. And I think there's some room to grow as well, because when he gets to like routes run, he's behind Elijah Moore. And there's a chance he can flip it. So shout out to Matt Leahy. Elijah Moore has led them in routes run back-to-back weeks. I think like if you can get Elijah Moore cheaper in Dynasty because of the ascension, I would still get him. We want to bet on talent. Elijah Moore, I don't think any of us would question his talent. We've seen him smash in NFL games. It hasn't happened for the first 2 weeks of the year, but there's been some like fluky production. Corey Davis had like a 66-yard touchdown in last week. If that would have gone to Elijah Moore, everybody would say, okay, it's great. There's 2 superstars. And then in week 1, Elijah Moore had, I believe, 2 offensive pass interferences, one that was a touchdown that they called back and one that was like a nonsense one. So I think if he catches either of those, people are a little happy now. So Elijah Moore, based on his routes run, is not going to disappear. But at the same time, we need to be realistic. And this kid, Garrett Wilson, is 21 years old, and he looks like Odell Beckham out there. So I'm fired up for him. A little less exciting is Ashton Doolin, but I think Ashton Doolin we need to pay attention to. Paris Campbell looks like he's dust. He looks like he's done. Alec Pierce was out with a concussion. Michael Pittman's out with an injury. And Doolin stepped up. Doolin had 5 catches for 79 yards. He led the Colts in both categories. I don't think he's extremely exciting, but I think you can get him for very cheap and kind of see where his role will go. Even when Michael Pittman comes back, I think this team needs a secondary pass catcher. We've seen Kylan Granson flash. Nyheim Hines is there, but they're not really using him like they talked him up in the preseason. So Doolin would be a guy to get for cheap. Another wide receiver who has been kind of a pleasant surprise is Sterling Shepard. He scored a touchdown in week 1. And then last week he saw 10 targets and he caught 6 of them. He didn't really produce much with it, but the Giants passing game is not really producing much at all. But going from a touchdown, following it up with 10 targets, I believe he had a 29% target share, something like that, 29% target share this past week. Kadarius Toney, who knows what they're doing with him? He saw an increase in snaps in week 1. I am not cutting Kadarius Toney. I'm like, I can't do it. I still believe in him for better or for worse. I probably should cut him, but I'm not. I want to see where it goes. I think, I would be hopeful that Dable can figure out how to use Kadarius Toney. But at the end of the day, with Wan'Dale Robinson out with an injury, Toney in kind of like, no man's land, Sterling Shepard, I think, has got a role on the Giants. And if you play 20-man formats like NFFC, FFPC, FFWC, Shepard should be a guy you go out and get if he's available on your waiver wire. It's a little bit boring, but he's got a role and a clear role right now on the Giants. Greg Dortch followed up a 7-reception, 63-yard opener with a 4-reception, 55-yard and a touchdown performance last week. He's got a role for as long as Rondale Moore is out. it's kind of hard to gauge this Arizona offense. They're not scoring anything in the first half. They have been putrid in both first halves, and then they make these comebacks, and against the Chiefs it was moot, but at least they put up some fantasy points. And then they make this miraculous comeback against the Las Vegas Raiders last week, and they end up winning the game. You have Kyler Murray scrambling around, converting 2-point conversions. Cliff Kingsbury's a fake sharp. We don't believe in him, but Kyler Murray's going to have some big games, and we want pass catchers attached to him in that offense. Zach Ertz took a big step forward in week 2. If you have Zach Ertz, you got to feel great about it again. But with the Connor injury, I wonder if they're going to target their wide receivers a little more. Dortch is like a desperation type play for you this week, but he's got a role. It kind of makes me a little bit more reassured for Rondale Moore for when he comes back, just based on how Dortch has done in what I believe will be a similar role. So Dortch is a guy I would grab. I grabbed him last week for super cheap in a couple of leagues. I'm glad I did so. I hope I don't have to start him this week, but you don't know with some of these injuries. Another guy is Noah Brown. Noah Brown had a 5-catch, 91-yard performance this past week for Dallas. Dallas was plucky. They win the game against Cincinnati. They don't put up huge stat lines, but Dalton Schultz now has an injury. So CeeDee Lamb's going to be targeted like crazy. We have to treat CeeDee Lamb like a low-end wide receiver too without Dak. But a second pass catcher will be potentially in play in very deeper formats. They say Michael Gallup could be back this week. So this is one you want to monitor for yourself. See what people are saying about Michael Gallup, over the next 2 days before you put a bid in. But Noah Brown has like a role. There was no other wide receiver utilized like Brown. It's pretty much, if Schultz is out, it's going to be CeeDee Lamb with Brown, and you got to feel pretty good about your Tony Pollard shares right now. Those two guys would see a big uptick. Again, if Michael Gallup's back, he could dust Brown, but I think the worst case scenario is Brown is a wide receiver 3. I think if I'm in an FFWC or in an NFFC league, I'm absolutely adding him. If it's an FFPC league, I'm not sure. Depending on how your situation is, it's a team assessment type thing. But Brown, he played every down, and he's right there with CeeDee Lamb. It's a very condensed passing tree if Schultz is out. We don't have a real update on Schultz, but who knows if he plays this week. The last one, I don't want to waste your time, but Sammy Watkins last week caught 3 passes for 93 yards, including a 55-yarder. In week 1, he led all Green Bay Packers wide receivers in snaps. In week 2, he trailed only Allen Lazard. Watkins, I really hope you don't need to add him, but he needs to be mentioned because he's a top 2 wide receiver attached to Aaron Rodgers. We're hoping that Romeo Doubs or even Christian Watson gets an expanded role, but that team is good, and we still somewhat believe in Aaron Rodgers and his ability to have a wide receiver ascend. I hope you don't need to add Sammy Watkins, but again, expect him to be out there almost every single snap. Tight end position is actually pretty exciting. Oh, let's take a couple of questions. Scott Cope, would Jordan Mason be a smart pickup? Yes, I think Jordan Mason would be a smart pickup. I think there's some sharp money, some guys that we both would really respect that I saw adding Jordan Mason last week. There's people that believe in him in these high-stakes formats. I think adding him would clearly be the move over Marlon Mack. I wouldn't overspend, but I think you could get him for like 2.5% in some leagues. I don't think people are going to prioritize him. And Scott, oh, wow. Thank you, Scott. So it looks like on Sirius, they're saying that Dalton Schultz is going to be out 2 to 4 weeks. So if that's the case, then Noah Brown should be added regardless of Michael Gallup. And let's see where this thing goes. I don't think that there's a tight end I would recommend in Dallas. I would expect that Ferguson, the tight end from Wisconsin, their 4th-round pick, would be a guy you'd want to look at on some of your dynasty leagues. And speaking of dynasty formats, a lot of you play dynasty in FFPC or in other leagues. Some of these tight ends I'm going to mention are not available on like my FFPC main event teams, but some of them are available in NFFC, FFWC, and my FFPC dynasty leagues. We have Logan Thomas, who was tight end 4, famously had a smash season in 2020, He was like the waiver wire tight end of the year that year. He helped people win. I believe he was the tight end for Abib Agbatoba when he won the Football Guys that year in FFPC. And Logan Thomas got a massive contract increase after that performance. And then last year he suffered through injuries, kept him out all summer. I fully expected Thomas to miss the start of the season. We were looking at, deep tight end options this summer on the GOAT District. We had, Andrew Cooper on. We were talking about all these names of Washington tight ends that we'll probably never mention again. But Thomas came back. He played week 1, and his usage increased in week 2. His snaps played went up big time, and he caught 5 passes for 37 yards and a touchdown. This is a guy who's in a pass-happy offense. He's had previous fantasy success, and there's a scenario where Logan Thomas is a back-end tight end 1 this year. He's that good. When he's healthy, he's that good, and we've seen it happen before. So Logan Thomas would be a guy I would prioritize. For some of you in home leagues, as well as NFFC and FFWC leagues, Evan Engram, he had a nice game this past weekend. He has caught 11 balls through 2 weeks. He was number 3 on the team in routes run this week. I think that the threat of Dan Arnold was kind of overblown. I think that was something that we heard to end the summer, that Dan Arnold will have a bigger role. It's been all Engram. Right now, I think the most reassuring thing about Engram is he's averaging 6.7 yards per reception, which would be the lowest of his career. We know that number is going to go up. So if you're holding Engram, I think based on his role and his athleticism, I think that a couple big games could be on the horizon. So I'm a little more intrigued about Evan Engram than maybe I was during draft season. I know Dan Williamson is a big fan of his, and we know how Doug Peterson tight ends have had success in the past. Tyler Conklin has been like a breath of fresh air for the Jets. He has outstanding usage. He now has 16 targets on the season. This past weekend, he caught 6 passes for 40 yards, and he had a very impressive 9 targets, and that's to go along with Garrett Wilson's breakout game. So Conklin is a thing in New York. He's available in most of my FFPC dynasty leagues, even some very high stakes ones. So Conklin's a guy that I'm going to be putting bids in for. I think that he's going to stick, and I think he's a very intriguing player. He played every single snap for the Jets this week. That'll change when CJ Uzomah is back. But again, CJ Uzomah is just a jag, and I think Tyler Conklin has a little bit of juice. He's interesting. We see a tight end emerge, from like the depths down up to like the top 15 tight ends every single year, and Conklin could be it. And then the last guy we'll talk about today is Hayden Hurst. We talked about him last week, and I wrote about him in back-to-back waiver wire columns on Player Profiler. Hurst now has 10 catches on the year. He has 15 targets on the year. He's a thing. He's not a high ceiling type player. He's more of a floor play, but this is how it went with Dalton Schultz last year. Dalton Schultz was in a good offense, a good passing game, and he kept catching 5 or 6 balls. People kept expecting it to end. And then at the end of the year, he's a top 5 tight end. I'm not saying that's going to happen with Hayden Hurst, but you cannot ignore back-to-back weeks with 5 catches at the train wreck of the tight end position. So it's I would consider adding all of these tight ends. It's actually a very exciting week to add a tight end in non-FFPC formats. FFPC, they're all rostered. I think that Juwan Johnson has shown enough. He's like top 4 in tight ends and air yards. He might be available in some leagues still. Kylan Granson looks like he's stepping up. Again, we're really scraping the bottom of the barrel. If you're in an FFPC league, I think it's worth looking at Jake Ferguson just based on the fact that the Cowboys like him. He had success in college. He was a 4th-round pick. We've seen some tight ends hit from the 4th round. We know that Dalton Schultz had a massive role in that offense. Again, I can't recommend Jake Ferguson for other formats, but if you play tight end premium, you should pick him up. He is the next man in Dallas. I hope everybody enjoyed today's show. I appreciate a couple people that gave me some feedback last week. We want this to be the best waiver wire show around. I hope it's very helpful to you if you play in deeper formats. And I appreciate all the questions in the chat today. Shout out to Jack O'Donnell. I'll answer his question. Let's see. Jack says, Cortland Sutton and Javonte Williams for Dalvin Cook half PPR. Yeah, I would make that trade. If you told me I could get Sutton and Williams for Dalvin Cook right now, I would absolutely do that. Sutton has an every week wide receiver 1 role there. He is the wide receiver 1 in Denver. Javonte Williams has shown enough where that trade would be something I would take the 2 for the 1. Cook was a little disappointing last night. That offense was shut down. He'll have bigger games ahead. But if you tell me I can get both Broncos for Dalvin Cook, I'm making that trade. Appreciate Matt Leahy, Scott Cobe, Andrew Schellenberg, JD, JG. I appreciate everybody in the chat, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Tune in at 9 o'clock tonight. High Stakes Roundtable. It's going to be awesome. Michael Edelman, Matt Modica. And then Thursday night, we have another Goat District tailgate. It'll be more exciting than the Browns Steelers when Pat Fitzmaurice comes into the Goat District, Fitz on Fantasy. It's his first time in the Goat District, I believe. And we're really excited to get a chance to talk to him. Have a great day, everybody. Take care.